In the world of Black Clover, the Wizard King is a prestigious title given to the Magic Knight with incredible power and achievements and wisdom. However, with there being so many different Wizard Kings in the story, especially following the Black Clover movie's release, giving us such rich information on a few of the Wizard Kings, we have clear signs that it's Asta's destiny to be Wizard King, which is why in today's Black Clover video, I want to discuss with you guys everything you need to know about the Wizard Kings of Black Clover and how each of these Wizard Kings has laid the foundation for Asta to become the next Wizard King in Black Clover. From the very start of the series, Black Clover fans found themselves wondering about the powers and abilities and the personalities of the previous Wizard Kings, because the only one that we knew is the 28 Wizard King Julius Nova Chrono, and as time progressed we would meet the first Wizard King, but literally everything in the story left a giant gap in the lore until we got the Black Clover movie, which literally changes everything. So the new Wizard Kings that we meet are Conrad, the 27th Wizard King, Princia, the 11th Wizard King, or rather Wizard Queen, Jester, the 16th Wizard King, and my personal favorite, Edward, the 20th Wizard King. So on top of those 4 Wizard Kings and Julius, we also have Lumiere, the first Wizard King, whose legacy only grows as a direct result of this Black Clover movie, because just as he was partially responsible for so much of the plot in early Black Clover, he also played a huge role in the current plot of the Black Clover movie, making him a great example of how a character can leave a lasting impression and impact on the series long after their death occurs. One of the biggest signs of a well-written character. As we look at the new Wizard Kings and their impact on the story, we have to start with Lumiere, because the way he began trying to change the Clover Kingdom during his short lifetime would get tossed out as more Wizard Kings took over, and you saw the corruption in the Clover Kingdom continue to spread. All of this was meant to set the stage for Asta to eventually become Wizard King at the end of the series, to surpass all the ones before him by becoming the type of Wizard King who does away with the prejudice of the kingdom, something the very first Wizard King was unable to do. However, even for as great as Lumiere was, because he created that Wizard King sword and because of the huge impact that it has, that's where we have to start, because in a lot of ways that might be the original sin that leads to Asta overcoming that sin to become the next Wizard King. Allow me to explain. Lumiere created the sword that will be known as the most fearsome weapon in the history of the Clover Kingdom, but this sword was meant to be passed down to each Wizard King for the purposes of obviously protecting the kingdom. But like nearly all weapons that are created, it doesn't matter how well the actual intentions are behind their creation, they will eventually be misused, and this is no different. Lumiere was someone who had a big heart that was only rivaled by the size of his fascination for magic and the impact that magic could have on the world around him. In particular, how magic could be used to better the lives of people of the Clover Kingdom, including those who are like Asta, who were born without magic or without having a ton of magic. His big heart led to him taking steps that he hoped would address the growing problem of prejudice that exists in the Clover Kingdom between those with mana and those who didn't have a lot of mana. As we would come to expect from the world of Black Clover, Lumiere for that reason was hated by numerous royals who thought themselves to be better than the lore-born citizens because of their status and the large amounts of their mana. He was too progressive for that time period, but despite this, he never compromised on his ideals or worldview. Yet, just as he would befriend elves, something that other royals wouldn't have done, let alone allow for marriage of one into their family, he was shown finding value in someone like Nero, who was deemed useless, and the expression "one man's trash is another man's treasure" comes into play, because with Nero's help, he created the Imperial Sword, easily one of the most broken items in the history of Black Clover. The reason being is quite simple. Sword passes on the power of the previous Wizard Kings to the next Wizard King to allow for the protection of the Clover Kingdom, making it so dangerous because every Wizard King in their own right was extremely powerful, easily the strongest of their time. So storing small bits of their power into the sword for so many generations creates an extremely powerful weapon over time. Think of it like compound interest, except instead of money, it applies to the mana stored inside the sword. Just as you could take, say, $10,000 today, and with compound interest at an 8% rate of return over 30 years, it would take that $10,000 into $100,000. A sword, you could argue, appears to work in a similar way, even if it's just a small portion of the power of the previous Wizard Kings, which, given the increase, is unknown. You can make your own headcanon whether or not it's addition or it's a multiplier. The fact remains that with each Wizard King's power that's added to it, the sword itself grows exponentially stronger with each generation of Wizard King, continue to contribute power to the weapon. It is also able to store and release magic, and we learn that the power taken in by the sword on its own is enough to blow up an entire country. Even more fitting, the sword itself shell contains a portion of each Wizard King's soul. So the weapon he created not only possessed the power of each Wizard King or a small portion of it, but also a portion of their souls, allowing for them to protect the Clover Kingdom that they love even after they had died. This was the blade that was meant to protect the Clover Kingdom and not want to be turned against Conrad's misuse, but as we said earlier, weapons as powerful are always destined to fall into the wrong hands and be misused. The weapons meant for protection can be turned around and used to take the very life they're meant to protect. It's due to tragic cycle that we as humans are caught in of life and death. Each moment someone dies, there's another life being born. Each moment someone is protecting life, there's another one taking it. It's a dark reality of the human experience because to a degree, every human possesses a capacity for violence, which is why Conrad being the one to misuse this blade is such really good writing, especially when you consider how his upbringing ultimately led to him going down the path where he would misuse the blade and why he was the perfect antagonist for the movie. As you would expect, Conrad was born into a noble family and was someone who possessed enormous amounts of magic power. His key magic, while broken, also came with the negative connotations and stigmas to it because it had the ability to do what will be perceived as being taboo, which is the ability to steal magic from others, and ultimately this set the stage for him to be the perfect antagonist for Asta to face eventually, because it would be something that allowed Asta to relate to Conrad, because like Asta, Conrad was shunned and looked down upon. Asta was looked down upon because he possessed no magic in a world where magic is everything. Despite this, Asta still had the love and support of those around him, which allowed for him to confront the prejudice of the Clover Kingdom in a way that has him on the path to become Wizard King like none other. It started with those in the orphanage who were some of Asta's first believers, including his rival Yuno, and it extended to members of the Black Bulls, who Asta would gradually change as time went by, with them fighting in battles alongside them. Conrad, on the other hand, was shunned and took to overcoming being the black sheep of the Clover Kingdom in a different way, because unlike Asta, he didn't have the same type of loving support that Asta had from those around him, and that's a key difference. Essentially, Conrad slowly began down the path similar to Sukuna and Gojo from Jujutsu Kaisen, which is those who are the strongest are destined to suffer loneliness for most of their lives, because being that far ahead of everyone else makes it harder to form attachments. But with Conrad, we do see he possesses a capacity for love. When he meets Julius during his time as a Magic Knight, he also eventually meets his wife and falls in love with her. It should have been in that moment that it was the start of Conrad walking down a path that Asta is on currently. After all, he said himself in the movie that he and Asta were very similar beings, and he was now being surrounded by comrades and love when he became the Wizard King. Yet this isn't exactly the case. Someone who went so long without truly being able to form connections and now having them was destined to spiral out of control once one of those connections was severed, which is what happened when his wife would be killed on a mission and the ones behind her death were revealed to be royals. By taking away his wife, someone who was an emotional anchor for him during a time where he was making true changes, it forced him to go into a very dark and primal impulse that mankind possesses, including the most dangerous one of all, the ability to shut off emotions and choose violence as a way to deal with his hurt. This resulted in the line of thinking that he tells Asta that people will always find a way to betray you because of the heavy scars he carried from the past. This betrayal that resulted in such a wounded heart resulted in him not just choosing violence, but a calculated and a very focused form of violence, which made him that much more dangerous. His goal was to destroy and rebuild. Gone was the thought process of trying to use the position of Wizard King to create a better world. Conrad just chose violence and was willing to use force to bend the kingdom to his will and rebuild the kingdom on top of the ashes of the kingdom after all the corruption was burned away and down to the ground. It was a man deeply hurt, going to extremes because of his emotional anchor being gone. His wife was dead, leaving him to drift off into the darkness of his own soul to become the villain who Asta would fight. He wasn't evil for the sake of being evil. That's why he's such a great character. He was evil because of how the world mistreated he and Asta, and unlike Asta, he succumbed to that darkness and he became evil. This ultimately led to Conrad using the Imperial Sword against Julius and the others in the monumental battle that will forever affect the history of Black Clover at the start of the movie. But once again, just as the first Wizard King created the Imperial Sword with good intentions only to have them then be misused, Julius defeating Conrad in the manner that he did ended up backfiring when Patrick took him out in the Elf Invasion arc, because it released Conrad and the Imperial Sword back on the unsuspecting Clover Kingdom, and due to the spell that Julius used to cheat death, he was now too weak to stand up against Conrad, and the three resurrected resurrected Wizard Kings brought back to assist him in the battle coming during the movie. However, he didn't just choose any Wizard Kings to help him in his plan to destroy and rebuild the Clover Kingdom. He specifically chose Wizard Kings who had a similar experience as him. They too were betrayed, they too were stripped of their status, they too were betrayed by royals. It was the ghost of Wizard Kings past coming back to haunt the Clover Kingdom. They were all victims of the corruption of the Clover Kingdom. In order to do this, they were going to absorb the magic of everyone and combine it with all the prior generations of Wizard King's magic and stab it into one of the mana veins in the kingdom, basically blowing everything up, taking a full-blown scorched earth approach to rebuilding everything. It was someone lost in the darkness going to an even bigger extreme than anyone could ever imagine. It was Conrad getting a god complex, which is fitting because as the expression goes and as the history of mankind shows us, absolute power inevitably corrupts absolutely. He's no different than someone like Alexander the Great, who wasn't content with how far he'd gone on his conquest, but instead he wanted to continue to expand his empire, which ultimately ended up being a key to his downfall and losing everything that he had built. Conrad planned to go back and bring back only those who he deemed as being worthy, basically cherry picking like he was Santa Claus going over a naughty and nice list. It was a god complex on display. In fact, due to how largely similar Asta and Conrad were, it led to him presenting Asta with the opportunity to carry out his dream. You can be the Wizard King in this new world that I'm building, and that's what makes their conflict so special, because it just goes against the very nature of Asta, who has been molded to become the antithesis of the Clover Kingdom's prejudice towards those who are born without magic or those with very little magic, yet he himself wishes to become the Wizard King in spite of all of this. The battle Asta versus Conrad is a very important clash of ideals and virtues, a soul guided by the light of righteousness versus a soul cloaked in the darkness that comes from hopelessness and despair, two things that often lead mankind to extremes, and it's what makes Asta's defeat of Conrad and his efforts to destroy everything hit as hard as it does thematically, particularly when the power and acceptance of the Wizard Kings of the past leads to Asta unlocking a new power and eventually getting Conrad to see this young boy might be able to fix the Clover Kingdom in a way that he himself was unable to do. However, just as Conrad's fall into the darkness was meant to show Asta what happens when someone so similar to Asta loses love and most importantly loses their way, the story of Lumiere is meant to teach Asta a very different story, which is it's okay to have hopes and dreams. It's okay to chase those hopes and dreams, but it's not okay to be blinded by those hopes and dreams when walking the dark path of reality, because that blinding light of a future that's so shiny and so far away can cause you to not see the dark threats in the shadows that are waiting for the right moment to derail you. That was Lumiere's weakness. As we went over with earlier, Lumiere had the goal of doing good to the Clover Kingdom by bridging the gap between those who didn't have a ton of magic or any magic at all and those who are blessed by the mana. But it would be a moment where his own sister was swept away literally that would change his life and destiny forever, because he would meet the elves and they were beings who are truly blessed by the mana, and he would meet his best friend in the process, someone who he could form a true bond with and who gave a dreamer such as himself an even bigger dream for the future. The problem with dreamers is that they're oftentimes crushed by the cruelty of reality, whereas Lumiere saw the time he spent with the elves as being a cause for celebration and the opportunity to bond with those with incredible magic, slowly growing a rosy-eyed dream of peace and harmony to higher levels than before. Tabata chose to show the dark impulses of what people, devil or human, are capable of, with Zagrad's complicated but clever play where he manipulated the situation just the right way to cause a massacre and drive a very desperate Licht into despair simultaneously, all while proving he was a true puppet master who had only been surpassed by the genius of Lucius Zagradus. It was important for Asta to learn the true events of what happened all those years ago that led to the events where the first Wizard King would gain his fame by killing Licht in his demon form, see the puppet master behind it firsthand, see Licht and Lumiere fighting alongside each other, and be in his presence while fighting alongside his rival Yuno, because it showed Asta the consequences of focusing too hard on a dream and the possibilities of what could come from a dream if you overlook the dangers hiding in the surface. It was a lesson that Asta learned that would guide him in the future when he inevitably becomes the Wizard King. Now, Princia, on the other hand, she presents a different lesson for Asta to learn. The lesson in particular is the importance of why the strong seek power and what can happen when they lose sight of why they truly truly sought power in the first place, and most importantly, what happens when you allow others to depend on you and your power to a point you can't tell when they're being disingenuous or selfish for the reasons for asking for you to use your power on their behalf. And given how powerful Asta's become through the course of the manga, particularly currently in the final arc, this is an important lesson that Asta has to learn. If he does indeed become the Wizard King, if he does not heed the lessons that can be gleaned from Princia's past, he's destined for failure when he becomes Wizard King. Born the eldest child in her family during her lifetime, royals would take over her homeland. This would give her a reason to seek out power for herself, and along her journey to seek power, she would join the Magic Knights. In fact, destiny would bless her with a type of magic that was fitting for her purposes by giving her Legion magic, what basically allowed her to create her own personal army of soldiers with her mana. It gave someone who is defenseless in the past the offensive power to never feel that emotion again. This would lead to her seeking power to a level that she would become one of the biggest legends in the history of the Clover Kingdom, because her unstoppable might resulted in her never losing a battle when she was involved in it as her time as a Magic Knight, and this overwhelming might and force is what led to her being made the Wizard King by the people who had caused her to set down on this path of seeking power, the royals themselves. Even worse, she became a victim of her own power, because during the war with the Diamond Kingdom, when her loved ones were being held hostage, the status of them being captured was withheld from her because her overwhelming brute force was going to be needed to secure the victory for the Clover Kingdom during this war. But it came at a terrible price, the loss of her loved ones, and it led to her losing her title of Wizard King because she rightfully went into a rage when she learned what happened to her loved ones, and that information was purposely withheld from her. They needed her power more than they needed her in her feelings. After being in prison and having that mighty magic that allowed her to never feel defenseless actually sealed away, she would end up sacrificing her life when intruders attacked the village that she was being held in. When we see her being reborn in the movie, taking out the anger and frustration on the Clover Kingdom, we see the other downsides to those who have overwhelming power such as her. They're alone for a long period of time until they can be reached by another. With power to destroy an entire country at her fingertips, she would turn that very power that she wants to use to protect her country against it, and it wouldn't be until Marileona had handed her her first defeat and victory that she would actually be stopped. But in Marileona, she saw someone who sought power, both for a similar reason as her, but also someone who hadn't fallen into the pitfalls that she did, and caused her to stare at a potential world in the face where if someone like Marileona had been around, she wouldn't have ended up on the track that she did. But it's worth noting, this is a Marileona who, like many in Black Clover, was changed by Asta, the boy destined to be Wizard King, and the boy who seeks the power and possesses dozens of times more power than her, but it's not falling into the same pitfalls that she did. Now with Jester, Asta learns the lesson of bewaring of arrogance and the distrust that comes from being so far ahead of each other, as well as the naivety that comes from being that strong, even when one seeks power for the purposes of preventing the misdeeds of others. Jester, during his lifetime, was an extremely skilled and powerful user of magic. During his very humble beginning, Jester would make friends with two individuals who would stimulate each other in the pierce of ways to achieve growth through learning and experience. Jester and his comrades, despite coming from different upbringings, they would get along together just fine. A shining example of the type of world that Asta and Julius and Lumiere wanted to create. A world where it doesn't matter your status. You can get along with each other just fine all the same. Because at the end of the day, we're all human, going through life with basic wants and desires that are needed for the human soul to flourish. After losing one of his friends, Jester would become the Wizard King, and upon learning that his deceased friend's homeland was under attack, Jester would rush into the defense, only to learn that the remaining friend was the one who was behind the attack. The betrayal caused a change inside of Jester, and rightfully so. Learning your best friend was a spy, planning to betray you and kill you is a hard pill to swallow, especially when you have to kill said friend in order to maintain your own life. That sort of betrayal is something that most people won't ever come back from, because it comes with a level of emotional damage that only those with an ironclad faith and will ever be able to endure. This grew to a point where Jester's hurt would lead him to arrogantly believing he understood all the nations and their people, believing he was right to distrust people sincerely, believing that loyalty to one's country and ideology of one's country would ruin it in the end. If there were to be peace, he would have to take a hands-on approach. So his idea was to conquer the four kingdoms, bring about change through force by bending countries and their ideologies to his will in the process. While he had good intentions, basically bring about peace through war is a necessary sacrifice on the road to said peace, but once again his trust issues would be proven correct because he would be betrayed by the royals and killed in the process. This is what makes his battles in the movie work so well thematically when you look back at him, because while we do see a degree of arrogance in his magic, which I get, he was totally heads and shoulders above everyone. A man who had been betrayed constantly in his life saw firsthand what happens when one is both humble enough to accept the help of others and wise enough to trust the right people, which is why in that very moment when Asta and managed to break through his barrier and ultimately play a role in his defeat, it was so important for him, but as well as for Asta, so that he can learn those lessons. Now with Edward, my favorite of the Wizard Kings we're introduced to, we see another lesson for Asta, which is the price of naive compassion. Edward isn't necessarily what you would think of when you think of an antagonist. He spent his years in the church and being exposed to lesser status people of the Clover Kingdom, people such as Asta, who had no magic power and suffered as a result of it. Discrimination against them, and yet making the most out of their everyday lives with what little they had. They were proof of the expression, you can't put a price tag on happiness, because they are simply things that money and resources cannot provide when it comes to happiness. Seeing this side of the kingdom led to him becoming a man of God, a priest, spreading the gospel and teaching and trying to leave a positive impact on the world through his service, something truly commendable. However, when war led to the orphanage he was overseeing being destroyed, with precious souls of the loved ones he was shepherding being sent to the afterlife many years before those children should have been called home, it led to a turning point for the compassion and kind-hearted soul known as Edward, and kindness would become anger, and he would use the magic inside of him to kill those who felt the pain that he felt. Fueled by that pain of loss, Edward became a magic knight with the intention of sparing himself and everyone else the pain that he had to experience on that fateful day. But his soul had truly been changed by what transpired in ways that he himself hadn't even considered at the time. When he became the Wizard King, he had every intention of creating a better world by using his power, which of course the royals got very upset over this. People drunk off of the classist system of the Clover Kingdom, they stepped in and they shot down his plans. They stabbed him in the back in a way that cost him his title as Wizard King, which led to this kind and compassionate man giving into the dark human impulse of violence, completely forsaking his religion and leading a rebellion which eventually led to his death. The naive compassion and desire to create a better world, it set him up for failure because it caused him to make the same mistake that the first Wizard King made, which is not seeing the ones in the shadows plotting against him. And it caused him to lose hope, which is why when he's reborn and he's fighting against Noelle, he needed to fight her, because in Noelle he finally got to see someone who represented a glimpse of the ideal world that he wanted to create, a noble like her who possessed the strong conviction and raw power, yet the compassionate heart that allowed him to interact with those of a lower status without being overly judgmental. Noelle was the proper balance of a natural force and a chaos who was in the process of controlling the magic inside of her as she grew into the woman that we see in the final arc of the series, where she's a compassionate heart that has a strong body and has a monster power that she's in control of. While it was Noelle who ultimately brought down Edward, Asta can learn from his experiences and learn not to allow his compassion to blind him as he seeks to build a world where class and those issues, they're bridged. Because bringing about the change that Asta wants to, it's going to come at the expense of having to deal with people who want to maintain the status quo by any means, but learning that lesson from Edward will allow him to do it. Now with Julius, this is where things get really interesting. We get yet another Wizard King who represents another obstacle for Asta to overcome, particularly because of the soul of Lucius, who uses the time magic of Astaroth and shares a body with Julius. On one hand, Julius in so many ways is just like the first Wizard King. He's fascinated by magic and wants to do away with discrimination and prejudice inside the kingdom over time, time, yet the twisted soul of Lucius has Asta physically battling the current Wizard King in battle. Like Conrad, Lucius went from one extreme for his vision to how to fix the problems for the world by using time magic to look for various timelines, seeing thousands upon thousands of different scenarios. Lucius chose to destroy and rebuild under the guise of Judgment Day, showcasing that like Conrad, he possessed a bit of a god complex, which you literally have Lucius sitting on a throne high above the Clover Kingdom in the final arc, as if to symbolize he's God sitting in heaven looking down at his creations on earth. His Judgment Day plan was one that would take the purified souls of devils, place them inside of human bodies, both alive and those who were selected that are dead, like say a Seer Silver, with the intention of making that ideal world. He was no different than Conrad, who was cherry picking who might be brought back. Again, it's a god complex. Lucius' plan to make this reality is a complex when making use out of the magic knights Julius had groomed, most specifically Yami with his dark magic and William with his world tree magic, so as to bring Lucifero, the king of hell, out into the mortal world at only 50%, which would be just enough for Asta and company to defeat, which would allow for him to take Lucius' devil heart and then go down to hell, take the remaining heart of Lucifero, who is at 50% power, and take it for himself. Even more brilliant is the patience that came from seeing this timeline success and the foresight to wipe away Julius' memory and lie in wait for all those steps to be completed before completely emerging again as a dominant personality. Just as Asta needed to take down Conrad, so too does Asta need to take down Lucius, because of the dangerous ideology and the extreme nature of his plan. Thematically, Asta cannot become Wizard King until he takes down the deadliest force that the Clover Kingdom's ever seen, because it isn't just the raw power of Lucius that makes him dangerous, it's also his patience. It's also his strategic nature. It's also his manipulation that he has at his arsenal. Someone like that cannot be allowed to lead men under a forced version of peace, one that is not earned under the sacrifices and the traumas and the joys that come from changing others as we go through the human experience. Each of these Wizard Kings and their mistakes and their life stories, it presents lessons for Asta and his journey as he triumphs over the threats, both physical in the form of enemies and cultural, as he works his way up to a point where he's being acknowledged in front of the crowds of the Clover Kingdom and saved the Clover Kingdom from the devil after Julius was unable to do so in the final arc, and is currently fighting Lucius in front of the Clover Kingdom to get that final stamp of approval, showing that he is truly the one befitting to bridge the gap between classes, because in the battles that the kingdom saw against Lucius and all his paladins, all the fancy magic that people like Yuno were using, it was all useless during this. Everyone struggled, yet Asta, a boy born without magic, is a walking middle finger to the power system of Black Clover. Asta, by bringing down Lucius, will prove that class doesn't matter and that the heart of a hero can be found inside of anyone, regardless as to where they start off in life, which if you're curious exactly why Asta has the heart of a hero, click here to watch that video.